I'm going to start with a confession. I'm sorry for holding public worship last week. I'm sorry for waiting too long to make the decision and hoping and praying that people would do the right thing and stay home. Even with all the warnings and encouragement to watch online, we had almost 90 people in the sanctuary last Sunday. And I know I can't be responsible for the decisions that individuals make. I know that. But I also know that as the minister, the shepherd of this congregation, I have a responsibility to lead and to sometimes make difficult decisions that will keep you safe. What we know now is that the decisions we make today will set the stage for what our communities will face 10 to 14 days from now, which is why it always feels like an overreaction in the moment. The effect of not closing public worship last week might not be felt until the week ahead of us. I didn't know. I did the best I could with the information I had. I'm not beating myself up, but I do regret it, and I'm sorry. We're all in uncharted waters here. By now, you're likely aware that the session met immediately after the service and agreed to suspend in-person worship for a couple of weeks, but in the end, the decision was going to be made for us anyway. A state of emergency was declared the next day, banning group gatherings larger than 50 people. Now we're urged to discontinue gatherings of 10 or more. These decisions have been made by people whose job it is to keep our communities, our cities, our provinces and territories and country safe. I want to keep us safe too. For the foreseeable future, while schools and non-essential workplaces will remain closed, we at Knox Oakville won't be gathering in person to celebrate worship either. We are told that all this distancing is what will slow the spread of the coronavirus. We are told that all this distancing will relieve some of the enormous pressure facing our healthcare systems. We are told that all of this distancing keeps one another safe, and I believe it. I believe the medical and public health workers. This is their area of expertise, not mine. This is all way outside of what we were trained for in seminary. Knox College doesn't offer a course on global pandemics, public health, or preparing worship in times of societal lockdown, although I'm making the recommendation now that they add it to next year's curriculum. What we do receive training in our Bible, history, and pastoral care, which the more I think of it, actually is what we need right now. Our scripture reading this morning is a timely reminder. I didn't pick it special for today. It was just the next reading in the narrative lectionary. Go figure. So a scribe comes to speak to Jesus, and he's not being antagonistic, which is a bit of a change of pace for Mark's gospel. Jesus is in the throes of a heated debate with some Sadducees about the scriptures and the truth of resurrection. A humble scribe kind of sidles up to him and asks, "Rabbi, which commandment is first of all?" It was rhetorical. Everyone knew the answer. 613 laws exist in the Jewish faith, but everyone knew the first one. The first and most important. It even has a special name. The question, I think, functioned almost like an invitation to bring the conversation back to the heart of the matter. So Jesus answers the scribe by reciting the Shema. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength." But Jesus isn't done yet. The second, he says, is like it. "You shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these." I saw a joke once. It said, define yourself. I'm going to crack myself up. Define yourself in 2 words, followed by the answer, can't follow instructions. If I was ever to have a headstone, that would be engraved on it. But the more time I spend with Jesus, the more I realize that it actually describes him too. It's almost like God makes a hobby of breaking out of the boxes into which we try to stuff him. Define yourself in 2 words, answered by 3. Rabbi, which is the greatest law? And Jesus answers with 2. Here's the thing. Loving God is fine. There's a safety to it, actually. But that second half of the law, that loving others part, well, that's risky business. In part because it's not always easy to know what it's supposed to look like. It's almost as if context determines meaning. If my neighbor is hungry, I give them a sandwich. If my neighbor is thirsty, I give them a drink. But what if my neighbor is lonely and we're being told to stay in our homes? Do I still go visit? Now, one response to all of this is to go rogue. In the face of the threat of the early Roman Empire and hostile Jewish leaders, the first Christians defied their enemies by meeting secretly in one another's homes and in the catacombs beneath the cities. There they shared clothes and food, they sang hymns and prayed, they tended the sick, cared for the widow and orphan. They risked it all to embody their love of God and love of neighbor. The danger is that some churches in our world today have felt that same urge to go rogue, to be the church, to continue to meet, to continue to pray and gather. A video surfaced earlier this week of a large conservative congregation in Cincinnati, where the pastor repeatedly encouraged his congregation of thousands to resist all that fear and panic and frenzy around the novel coronavirus. I'm not saying people aren't dying, he said, but they tend to be very old people and people who have significant medical problems. I just want to say you're going to be okay. I saw another video of I need to get off the internet. I saw another video of a pastor of a different church actually encouraging his members in defiance of COVID-19 to get up and greet one another, not just with handshakes, but with hugs and kisses too. And over the rabble, you can hear him shout, if we aren't safe here in church, then where can we be safe? The video shows hundreds of people crawling all over each other. The effects of that decision likely won't be felt till next week. Now, I'm not being a doomsdayer here. Yes, many of us will catch the novel coronavirus and we'll be fine. That is, for the vast majority of us, it will not be life-threatening. COVID-19 will cause cold and flu-like symptoms that could range from fairly severe to barely noticeable, and most people will recover. That's the truth. So we really shouldn't be paralyzed with fear. In fact, we keep hearing that quote from 1 John 4, that perfect love casts out all fear. Or even the passage from 2 Timothy 1:7, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. I think too many Christians forget that last part. But here's the thing. We misinterpret passages like these and create unhelpful binaries. And if there's one thing I hate, it's earwigs. But if there are 2 things I hate, it's binaries. It's just all jokes for you, Jane. She's my laugh track this morning, it's great. Binary thinking boils down our options to this or that, black or white, good or evil. Binaries fail to recognize that life takes place on a spectrum. Very few things are clear-cut. Yet what happens with passages like 2 Timothy or 1 John 4 is that we create binary thinking when it comes to faith and fear. We either have faith or we are slaves to fear. The corollary is that if we are afraid, we must not have enough faith. And so in some faith communities, the message becomes that those who go on living their lives with minimal disruption are living in faith, while those who cancel travel plans, make arrangements to work from home, and avoid large gatherings are succumbing to fear. But this binary of faith and fear is wrong. Faith and fear are not opposites, and in fact, faith demands some kinds of fear. Fear of the Lord, it says in Proverbs chapter 9, verse 10, is the beginning of all wisdom. Sobering, reverential fear is essential to faith. Paralyzing, scary fear is not. Consider again the churches where the message is being preached that we have nothing to fear. So let's keep meeting together because that's what people of faith do. What's striking about these messages is the absolute dismissal of anyone who might be at risk. The elderly and those with compromised immune systems. When we say, let's just keep meeting, we have nothing to be afraid of, it casts a spotlight on our assumption that we have the spiritual luxury of choosing faith over fear. Allowing ourselves to feel a sigh of relief that we are going to be okay, failing to recognize that this we actually excludes huge numbers of our vulnerable friends and family. When we instruct others not to worry about COVID-19 because we will be okay, we have faith, so we are not afraid, the takeaway for those who fall into vulnerable demographics is that you are not us. I've even heard we are not afraid to contract the virus and even die because we have faith. Great. But what about the extra burden on the medical community? And what about those who might catch it from you? These are especially upsetting messages coming from Christians. Given the historic message of the church, Jesus' message is unique because of its excessive amount of concern for the vulnerable. The widow, the orphan, and the foreigner were all the most vulnerable in Roman society, and they still are. But this new enemy, this COVID-19, has created another demographic of vulnerable people. And it doesn't care whether you are an orphan or widow or what country you hail from. So when we read in our scriptures, love God and love your neighbor as yourself, we must also hear in that the prerogative that we are called to care especially for our vulnerable neighbors, the ones who aren't likely to be okay. Listen to me. If you take away only one thing this morning, let it be this: that Christians are rarely more incarnational than when they say society may consider you expendable, but we do not. No greater love has a person than they lay down their life for a friend. In this time of social distancing, laying down our lives means staying home, not hoarding, possibly facing financial hardship, isolation. Why? To keep the most vulnerable among us safe, because that's what it means to love God and love our neighbor. Love means doing the difficult, uncomfortable thing. I'm not having a good time either. I am an extrovert. I miss you, all of you, Knox, very, very much. But this is what we do to keep each other safe. In his article this past week in Relevant magazine, Tyler Huckabee, what a great name, wrote, "The best defense that the vulnerable have against COVID-19 is for those people who are healthy to take serious measures and protect themselves, halting the disease in its tracks by using their own relative health as a human shield to keep others from getting it. Social distancing, working from home, eating in, and maintaining more rigorous than usual personal hygiene may cause disruption to your personal life, but it is an uncommonly literal way to live out the famous command from the Bible to love your neighbor as yourself." Consider again that passage from 2 Timothy, chapter 1, verse 7. "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." These are not binaries, because power, love, and sound mind are moving targets. Context will determine the use of power, the application of love, and the exercise of a sound mind. God has graciously given us a spirit equipped with these resources, not a spirit paralyzed by fear. Perfect love casts out all fear. Fear can be a motivator, fear can be a great teacher, but it does not rule us. With sound mind, we use what power we have, we use whatever is within our power to not only love God, but also to love others. The vertical love is clear. The horizontal love is less obvious. And in a time when scientists and medical personnel and governments are urging us to distance ourselves from other people because of a microscopic enemy that is leveling whole communities, whole countries, we need to exercise our sound mind in order to love in powerful ways. What more loving thing can you do than disrupt your routine in ways you don't want to for the sake of others, for the sake of the vulnerable, for the sake of the 90 who sat in here last Sunday, many of whom fall into the vulnerable demographics? What better way to manifest God's concern for those most at risk than to take extreme steps, not because you have to, but because you choose to? It's not about whether you or I will be okay. Philippians 2:4 implores Christians to look not only to his or her own interests, but also to the interests of others. Loving others requires sacrifice. If it didn't, everyone would do it. In this case, the life you save may not necessarily be your own. I started this message by confessing, by apologizing for holding public worship last week, for not taking the courageous steps soon enough to protect you from the microscopic enemy racing through our communities, for loving you enough to say, no, the doors are closed, stay home. I assure you, I will not hesitate next time. It's a hard decision, but so often the right thing, the loving thing, is difficult. But we have been equipped with power to make the choices, the love to see them through, and the sound mind to evaluate and reevaluate, to consider the context and do what protects life. This is going to be a long process. We are going to have to be creative in our ways of communicating with one another, loving each other, checking up on each other, sharing with each other, especially if you bought all the toilet paper and hand sanitizer, and encouraging each other. And on the other side of us, when we can all step out from the tombs within which we have been sealed, what a glorious day that's going to be. The gates of death and hell will not stand a chance against the power of our praise when our voices and bodies are together again in worship. That day is coming, Knox. Wait for it. Dawn always comes after the dark. So hold fast. To God be all the glory. Amen.